Finally, one, two, three, we've been able to start. Billy, how you doing?
Absolutely. Very well. How are you?
Very good. I got a kind of motivation why I wanted to be here with you. Um, every single morning, and it's random time. Sometimes it's the middle of the day. I see you at the gym, and no matter how we feel, we have these incredible conversations, right? And my perspective is that without knowing your story, today we're gonna find out. I think you're one of those very few people who have been able to like make it in a lot of ways, like financially, spiritually, socially, and all that. And as much as I can, I like to learn your secrets tonight.
Absolutely. I'm here to share as much as I can, and likewise to you as well. I appreciate you saying that.
Of course. So the beginning is like literally pretty humble, right? I mean,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I come from safe to say humble beginnings. I think
okay,
that's a safe to say. I will say this though, my father always did everything he could to do what he could. My dad worked, and my dad instilled in me persistence, and my dad's my role model. He's somebody I think, regardless, almost to a fault, did the right thing. I think especially living out here, you see a lot of people that do lots of different things,
right.
and good, right or wrong or indifferent. And something that my dad always instilled in me was doing the right thing, and he always did everything that he could to.
Are you still close to, like, very close to him,
Yes, my
right?
dad is my dad is my
Your
right
hero.
hand guy. He is. Yeah, I think he kind of taught me to have you should be your own hero. But through that, he is mine for sure. I think he's just played such a role in the man I've become.
Uh huh.
And I wouldn't be. I say this not lightly, the opposite of lightly.
Right.
I'm very careful about my words in general, but
Absolutely.
especially when I say things
Uh
like
huh.
shaping who you've become and things like that. I think those words, I think nowadays a lot of words have lost some meaning,
Right.
and so I do say those. When I say it, I mean it, and he's definitely
Right.
shaped a tremendous. I can't even really conceptualize how much he's impacted me.
I got a question about that. I know that spiritually and mentally, you have not been always at the same level, you
I
know,
think that's safe to say.
right?
Yeah.
And what was your perception of your dad back then?
Interesting. That's a really good question. I think it's always been the same. It's always been the same. I think something I take pride in is the fact that even when I might have been maybe not at the same spiritual level or as known as much as I know, I still have a million and one things to learn. But maybe at the level now, I think the reality is though is that I've always had that perception. I was never the kind of kid that was, forget my parents,
Uh huh.
screw my parents kind of thing. Especially my father. I always was
Uh huh.
very respectful.
Yeah.
Something he instilled in me. Growing up like a small thing was like my dad it was always like Mr. and Mrs. I refer to everyone's parents as
Wow.
Mr. and Mrs.
That's
And it's
amazing.
yeah, and I think and that was just one of those things, and he instilled that into me young. And I think even what we talked about off camera before, just
Uh
my
huh.
the schooling, growing up, all those little things. I think all those little things I think the little things equal the big things, right? And I think all those little things and just doing the right thing, and
Absolutely.
I think that is it's a humongous thing. I think it's a humongous thing. I think it's overlooked. I think just even the aspects of doing the little things the right way, and those little things carry over to the big things,
Absolutely.
and I think that's
If you could make like a 1% improvement in whatever you're doing every single day, at some point you're going to see like a tremendous
oh,
type of
absolutely.
change,
And like we
right?
talk about the book, the Gary Keller, that Gary Keller book, The One Thing.
One
I
thing, right?
think so many people look at success, and I did this years ago. Is I'd start trying to look at success from a day to day perspective,
Uh huh.
right? And then you catch yourself miserable
Right.
after months or years because you're expecting these tremendous leaps and bounds from day to day to day, whereas in reality, I think it's a Tony Robbins quote or something. People underestimate what they can do
Right.
in 5 years, but they overestimate what they
Right.
can do in like 6 months to a year,
So we
right?
gotta have like a little bit of a special section for that book, One Thing.
Hmm.
And that was like one of those moments that I was kind of questioning my like book reading habits
Mm.
because like I wasn't able to remember what I read, right?
In the book from that book,
Any book, like
sure,
I was reading consistently, but then there was a moment that I had to remember what I read, and it was
interesting,
like a failure. I'm like, oh my god. But let's get back to it. We were talking about your humble very beginning, right?
sure.
And you literally mentioned about your impact of your dad in your life and all
Hmm.
that, right? Which is incredible. I was going to actually mention we meet so many people who claim that they are very successful, and if you do a little bit of a digging, you would always see like, okay, what is the secret here, right? I think one requirement for every single successful person is the family. And it's naturally, you sound like you already checked that off like in the very beginning of it.
I think that's a great point. I think that's a very interesting point. I think that might be a point that not everyone brings up. I think that's actually like probably the first time I've heard that direct correlation. But I completely agree. I think there's one of the guys you see on like the internet. I forget who it was, but brings up a very interesting point about the idea of one of the prereqs of being successful
Absolutely.
is knowing that no matter what you do, someone will always love you.
Right.
And I think that is the foundation of being able to take risk, right? Because I think there's this direct correlation between the amount of risk and stress you're willing to tolerate and your success, right?
Absolutely.
I think there's a direct correlation between the two. And I think at the end of the day, we're all on some level, our childhoods are directly related to who we are as people today, right? And so I think a lot of that comes from, like I said a second ago, your willingness or ability to be able to handle your stress tolerance, right? Your stress threshold. And I think as a young age, if you know at the back of your head, hey, I could screw up here, but someone's still going to love me at home kind of thing, I think that goes a long way, regardless of financial status, whatever it may be, from a true love standpoint like that, and I don't use those words lightly. I think knowing that it's conducive of the idea that you're going to be able to handle some risk, I think, on some level, right?
Do you have siblings?
I have a younger sister.
Younger sister.
I have a younger sister. Yeah. Growing up, we butted heads for sure. I think I was always more not quiet. I could always talk forever, but I think I think being the firstborn kind of thing, I think naturally there's a little bit of favoritism, if you will, in the firstborn aspect. And I think she felt that a little bit, and I think
there's a little jealousy.
We butt heads, but I love my sister dearly, and now we're very close.
When did you come to LA?
That's a good question. I think just under 5 years now. As you probably know as well, life moves in beautiful, crazy ways, right? And I think sometimes time with even just moves different. You're at a different vibration, and time moves differently. It almost feels like,
Right.
But I think it's been but just under 5 years, I want to say.
Right. So a little bit of an explanation about this podcast right here, and Billy, of course. So because of my job, my company, Zuma Housing, I interact with young people every single day. People from different countries, different backgrounds, and different mindsets, right?
Sure.
And I always feel like my company and the service we provide have a little bit of like an impact in their life in Los Angeles, right? It's almost like the first stop. We deal with so many international students. Right? They're very excited about Los Angeles.
Sure.
And the higher the expectation, the higher the frustration is sometimes when they come here.
Yes.
Because what they see is like, LA is going to be incredible. We're going to have parties. We're going to meet like amazing people and all that. And then LA has its cold face, right? As soon as you come, it shows it to you, right? So
I call it the LA heartbreak.
Absolutely.
I call it the LA heartbreak.
Absolutely.
Right? But
absolutely. Yeah. And I experienced that as an international
You come
guy.
with all these things, and then you come with all these expectations and all these things in your head, and then you meet your favorite singer, song, or whatever, and you realize the guy's just a normal guy who's kind of an asshole or whatever, and it takes a little bit of the mystique out of it. Let's continue.
Absolutely. So because of my interactions with different people from different backgrounds and all that, I always want to tell them like, hey, like you seem a little bit depressed, you seem a little bit sad, but wait a minute, there are certain secrets you need to crack and you'll be able to do amazing, right? So, and the common situation is that like young people are like a little depressed nowadays. They're like really like they're feeling complicated, right? So you are one of those guys who have done it, like who has done it, right? Like you've been able to find those secrets. You've been able, that this is an everyday work. It's not like you took care of this overnight and you're like, okay, I'm a new Billy right now, right? And that was like very, very interesting for me. That's why I wanted to get to know you more.
Sure.
Every day we added like more conversations to the portfolio between you and me, right?
The Rolodex of
exactly.
conversations.
And I think one of your ways of learning is teaching. That's what I feel. And I like to talk about that a little bit because you are a coach.
Sure.
Okay. Am I right? While you teach, you learn.
Oh, absolutely. I think in more ways than just one, right? I think from a fundamental standpoint, I think it's one way to obtain information. It's another way to be able to articulate that information back to somebody,
Absolutely.
right? I think, secondly, you say things out loud. It's one thing when you read or you digest information, but then when you say it back out loud,
You hear
you
yourself.
hear yourself and you
Right.
almost say, maybe that doesn't
Right.
sound as good as I think it does, and vice versa, right? And so I think you're absolutely hit the nail on the head. And I think you said something you said a second ago, I think is really interesting too. You connecting in some way, shape, or form. You like to think that you are helping people through your work, right? And I think
Absolutely.
that's the foundation of a lot, right? I
Right.
think when it's money goals or monetary things, et cetera, those things really do come and go.
Right.
I think it a lot of it comes down to what you need to do and not what you want to do.
Right.
Right. And I think through that, it's, maybe I should say, I have this obsession with just wanting to help and add value. I've always had this thing that I want to have 1 billion people at my funeral one day.
Right.
Right. And through truly feeling like I've impacted 1 billion lives. Right. And I think money is simply the byproduct of that.
Right.
And I think something where my life really changed was when I stopped. Because I think a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm not pursuing money," but in the back of their head, it's there, right?
That was my story.
It's there, and I think it takes this. And I found that through meditation. Realistically, was this idea of being so grateful, because gratitude is one of the highest vibrations you can operate from,
Right.
and being so grateful for the present moment that none of the other exterior stuff really mattered, right?
Right.
And I think that's where it stemmed from. But my point being is, there has to be this fundamental idea of deeper than the money,
Right.
deeper than whatever. And it's so easy maybe when you're in the situation
Right,
to
right,
say it,
right,
but
right.
that real thing, and it goes back to another analogy that I think is truly changed my life, is a lot of people wait for the mirror to smile first. If you think of the universe as a mirror, right?
Right.
The universe is simply a reflection of
They
what you
expect
feel.
a certain thing,
They
right.
say, once I get the car, once I get the girl, the house, the whatever it may be, then I'll be grateful.
Right.
Then I'll be happy. Then I'll
Right.
operate like that version of me,
Right.
right? But it's really the exact opposite.
Right.
It's you operate like that version of you now, therefore the universe has no choice but to
Absolutely.
give it to you, right? So I think that's the real defining moment, is being able to access that level of thinking, that feeling, that vibration, if you will, before it really happens.
Right.
And therefore it has no choice but to reflect it back on
We're
you,
gonna
right?
get back to the meditation part. It's
Sure.
I like to talk about it.
I think we talk about that for
Right,
it's
right,
like
right,
3
right.
hours
That's
alone,
another
right?
common
Yeah.
point between you and me. Absolutely. Um, so you were talking about how you need to like not really focus on the money part while you're like working on something. Money should be, of course, it's kind of like a reward.
Absolutely.
But this whole coaching and your social media like actions and all that, right?
Yeah.
It's not the number one thing, of course, right? I actually experienced that when I set up my business as a very small shop. You know, my intention was to really like help people out because my experience with housing was terrible, right? So I came to LA.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah.
So I came to LA. Like I was able to barely speak English, right? And then it was in a very difficult market, like UCLA. I thought everything was going to be easy because before I got to LA, on the brochures, everything sounded like super duper easy, right?
Beautiful,
Happy
right? Yeah.
students, families, and all that, right?
Yeah.
I got here. I saw the cold side of LA, and I was able to convert that difficulty into a business model. And my literally like initial intention was to generate an additional $2,000-3,000 in the very beginning. And my first clients were my friends. We were hanging out, and I would collect rent once a month, but keep hanging out with them and all
Sure.
that, right? So after like I started the business 2-3 years after, I lost the magic because I became very capitalist. I forgot about that friendship, connection, the survival mode and all that. And I expanded my business from like literally like 20 units to 200 units, right? It was like incredibly like high traffic type of business for me.
Sure.
Literally the amount of money I was making was like unimaginable.
Never
right?
seen
So
that
I was,
before, kind
yeah,
of thing. Yeah.
exactly. But at the same time, I'm looking at myself like that time and I'm like, you know, I wasn't handling it really well. I thought I was very special in the
That's
very
your
beginning.
first probably issue.
And
right?
whatever business I put my hands on, it's going to work out.
Sure.
Type of like I had the mindset, right? So what I want to say is it's kind of like a very common thing, right? Like once people start finding that like really great idea, like you got this incredible business idea because you experienced some kind of difficulty and you came up with the solution. That's why that's your idea.
Sure.
And then you forget about that. You literally like lose the magic, and you lose like that whole like reason why you get that in the first place. And that was my experience with my company. I totally forgot that the people who were my customers at the time were also like, you know, like my friends, right? I put that crazy distance between myself and my company. I was literally going for the shortcuts. So, and money making was like a number one priority with all the advantages like Ferrari and like a nice house and all those kind of things. And it took me literally 7, 8 years to really understand why I was losing. Like, because
Losing what? Just to clarify. When you say
I was losing like the initial like harmony, the magic. People didn't like my business anymore. They were putting really bad reviews. I was having like very heated conversations with my back then friends, but at the time customers and all that. And I didn't really care about any all that. And then one day when I had like enough data to make a comparison between like how I was and how I was back then, I'm like, wait a minute. Like this whole money thing changed me a lot, and I totally forget about the original reason why I was able to have this all, right? I mean, how do you maintain that for yourself? Because there are more people watching you, learning from you. They're giving you like an incredible like compliments and all that, right? Your ego is getting touched, right? Like that's happening. How are you able to maintain that? And not forget about where you come from, all those kind of things.
And that's a really good question, right? I think that's a great question. I think with that being said, there's a few ways, right? I think one is I've gone through those exact emotions you've had, right? And I think the smartest people, I think it might be like Alex Ramosi or one of these guys out there that's a big, says intelligence is the rate at which you learn things.
Right.
And I've always taken pride in the fact that I don't need to be one of those people that needs to go through something 2, 3, 4, 5 times to learn. I touch the fire once and I usually learn from there, know? And so.
But it's an everyday work.
Oh, it is, right?
It's an everyday work, right?
And it is.
Yeah.
It is. And there's no off button. I think there's something that really hit me was like, it's actually ironic, and I'll make a kind of a personal life reference as well. I think it's really interesting. I think a lot of people have this expectation that you can live the social life and the whatever and then be hyper successful in everything else, right? And I think what I mean by that is there's no off button, and you have to be able to find the balance on some level. And a lot of hyper successful people don't have much balance,
right.
I think, but I accepted the fact that I used to think like, oh, I can be hyper successful and then also fuck off for however long, right? And the reality is that it doesn't really,
and that's okay.
And yes,
that's okay.
But I think for me that didn't really work. And what I more so meant was that when I detached myself from needing those things, it was as if, like you said, it's a day-to-day thing, right? And there's just no off button.
Right.
I don't get to go live half the day like this and then half the day is going to be like this.
Does it mean sometimes you still want to be part of those kind of things?
Oh, absolutely. I think anybody who says that would probably be lying on some level, right? But I think the big thing, though, is I've just changed, kind of like to make a comparison to tough decisions. It's not about wanting things to get easier. You just got to get tougher and get more, as we talk about, get more comfortable with the uncomfortable decisions, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's what the differentiators. That's more so I just changed my belief system around those things. But I think that you bring up an interesting point that the most successful people, the smartest people, the difference between them and average is not the fact that they don't have negative thoughts. It's how they handle negative thoughts or how they handle those kind of thoughts, right?
Because things happen, right? And just the way we feel about those happenings, it's all different.
To deny emotion is to deny the very thing that makes us human, right? I think it's just a simple fact is a lot of average people let one bad thought turn into a bad minute, then a bad hour, then a bad half a day, then that bad day, and it spreads, crazy. Right? Where when you become the observer of your thoughts and you are I like to say a successful person, whether it's mentally, entrepreneur, whatever it may be, in some level you've mastered your mind on some level, which is it's a never-ending pursuit, but you're on the path, is where you can be the observer of a negative thought.
Right.
Take a step back.
At some point, though, in the past, at some point, you were not a successful person. You were not a happy person.
Yeah.
You were not a confident person.
I was not a happy person for sure.
All right.
Yeah.
I want to know about that. Like, who were you? And why were you not happy?
And that's a multifaceted question.
Right.
But no, I think a few things. I think, my parents split up when I was like, I kind of always was class clownish growing up. I think that was, looking back now, hindsight, that was a way of connecting with people in some way. I always could articulate myself well, but I think that was where I found the reactions of people and pulling on the heartstrings just always connected with me in some way, And so that's kind of where it started. My parents split up, and that really took the wind out of me, that really
How old were you at the time?
freshman year of high school. So
Okay.
like 12, 13. So it was a
Okay.
weird time. And I grew up in this area where, a lot of the soccer mom, helicopter moms, if you will, just talk shit the whole time.
Wow.
And in my area, it was still uncommon. This was
What
over
other
it.
people think about me? It
Oh,
started back then.
absolutely,
Okay.
right? Absolutely. And I never cared though. I will say from that perspective I will say up until then, I never really, or maybe I cared, but it was a positive kind of driving me to want to be
Right.
better, right? Not from an egotistical standpoint.
Even
more-
at that time?
I think I've always been self-aware. I've always been maybe self-aware to like just where it can be a lot almost for one to handle. And
But at the time, you were not thinking about business, how you were
oh,
going
I
to
was still
settle
12,
and all that,
13.
right?
I was always an
like-
entrepreneur though. I remember reselling Nike socks. I'd go tie-dye them and I'd resell them. So I always had that spirit in me. I always did.
Is it from your dad or it's just naturally?
No, my dad was, probably not much of I was always a risk taker. I always like tried to push the envelope forward. I think my dad almost maybe on some levels was the opposite on some level, but he, no, I don't know. I think I've always, and I don't want to say it was a thing because I don't want to undermine the work that I've put in or the thought process I've developed. I don't want to say it's this born thing. I think I was maybe born with this somewhat of a curiosity, but it was my choice to act on that curiosity, if you will, But I think I always had that spirit inside of me, and I don't think it really came from anybody besides my just intrinsic burning desire to be curious, and I always have wanted to be the best.
But you were with your dad, right? Like after the divorce?
Yes,
Or
my
you
stay with
stayed
my
with
dad.
your
My dad was
right?
always,
And your sister too? Both of
Yes,
you
my
guys
dad
were-
was always that. My mom had her struggles for sure. My
Sure.
mom had her ups and her downs, just emotionally, mentally, substance wise.
Sure.
She had her ups and her downs. And my dad, I never actually have seen to this day. I don't think I've really ever seen my father drink.
Wow.
And he was always this rock. He was always this rock.
Wow.
And that to me was this.
What I like to talk about is because you made that entrance to LA, right?
Sure.
As a single guy who's
Yeah.
really handsome, who's ready to like rock and roll and all that, right? How old were you back then?
Dude, I want to say 22. I think it was
years
22
old.
I was.
Okay. And why did you decide to come to LA?
Yeah, so I was, in a past life, I almost call it, I was a DJ music producer. And so from 18 to 22-ish, I was a DJ music producer. And things grew very quickly.
Right.
Right. And so things grew very quickly. And
So you were organizing parties and like...
I was not organizing. I was the one that the organizer hit up to come perform
Right,
at the
okay,
party. Right?
okay, wow,
And
okay.
so that grew very quickly. And keep in mind, this was, 5, 6, almost, at this point, 8 years ago, almost a decade ago, to the point where social media was very different. A big part of my brand was always
what was the name of that social media platform?
Vine.
MySpace.
No, that was much after then.
Oh,
I'm not
after
that
that.
old, but
Okay, all right.
no. But in all seriousness, it was a big part of my brand was being mysterious online.
Wow.
It was just all you saw was a few photos, videos of me playing in front of thousands of people and just making people go crazy. That's all really that you knew.
Right.
And so I knew how to leverage that.
Right.
I knew how to create the intrigue, not letting you know too much while still leveraging like live footage. Then I'd go tell this guy, then I'd go play for free. And then I'd go do this. And
Right.
it
When I
grew.
think about a DJ, I always know the like very usual setup. There is that like a very popular guy spinning, and behind him there are like so many hot girls. So you are that guy.
I guess if you want to call it that, it definitely, I will be, totally brutally honest here.
Because I saw your Instagram, like
Yeah.
literally, like you were literally like spinning for thousands of people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the back side and the front side, there are people who want to be with you, right? That's what it is, right? I feel like that would create a lot of like extra ego for someone. Especially like a guy who is around your age at the time, like 22 years old, right? Or even younger.
I was younger than that.
You were younger
It
than
all
that?
happened very quickly.
How did you handle that?
I didn't. I didn't.
Okay. All right.
I didn't. I think it was all very new. I didn't. I'll tell you, going and playing in front of a couple thousand people and then people asking you for a photo after, people getting to just you point
Getting
out
a
a
number
girl
and all that, yeah.
it was more than just getting a number, right? It was very easy, and it changes your perception of how things operate and what's kind of normal and what's not. And it all happened very quickly. But I will say I was never ever. I was always still the quietest guy in the room. And that's what the brand was built off of.
Which would make you more attractive.
That's but it was from a business standpoint and that's who I was.
Right.
And it's actually interesting. I talked to a few friends that are pretty big actors or whatever you want to call it, and we shared interesting stories about that because you get so used to people going up to you and you not having to go break the ice or anything, right? And then walk into a room and they knew who you were already.
Which is kind of a disadvantage in business because you don't have to use your sales skills because everybody comes and sells to you, right?
And I kid you not, it took me years to get to rewire my brain to get back to that.
Right.
It took me, it was a learning curve back to get back to this point of in my head of that. It took some time, man. It took some serious time. And
so you think you're an advantage, but it was a very clear disadvantage because people don't let you speak. They're like, hey, don't worry about it.
My manager spoke for me. I never booked gigs anymore. Manager got the girls on stage, all those kind of things, And so even in just, I'm on camera saying it's like a dating life. It was effort. It was so easy.
Right.
And then you lead that life. I left that life and you have to rewire your brain a little bit,
right?
To get used to those things, and it's definitely a new way of thinking.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So then, look, I'm putting myself in your shoes, right?
Sure.
I'm a DJ. I'm very popular, and I'm a very good-looking guy, and I'm making money through whatever you're.
Yeah, you go
doing.
from nothing to it came very quickly.
Whatever form of money you're kind of introduced, that's perfect for you. You feel like you're the richest guy in the world, anyways, right?
Especially at that age with those guys,
exactly.
6 figures a year looks very nice, right?
And then this is a pretty comfortable situation, and I guess you were also thinking about being comfortable with uncomfortable back then because this is the real story here, right? And you said, you know what, I'm going to break that cycle. I don't like to be the guy who has all attention here. What did you do afterwards?
Well, so I think there's a few moving pieces before that. So COVID hit, right? But before then, you bring up
2021, right?
Yeah. So you bring up an interesting point though about losing that fundamental idea of something, right? In terms of that passion, whatever. It became for me a lot about money. My brain was built off of that scrappy kid that showed up, that waited for that club promoter or that club owner outside the club. I demanded to get your number. I did not leave you alone. I offered to play for free and I did not leave you alone.
Wow.
Until I play. I've always been a super scrappy guy.
So that was the beginning of your DJing career.
Of just being scrappy. You were trying to find some gigs for you. And just super scrappy, like anyway, anyhow. I didn't care if it was in front of one person, 1,000. I didn't care. I showed up and I'd play for free, but I was so confident in what I was doing that I knew you'd invite me back.
This is incredible because you were saying from that girl interaction standpoint, you were the quietest guy.
Sure.
But when it comes to really getting a business, you were right there like a shark.
Oh, it was still very entrepreneurial back then. Right. It was still very entrepreneurial, just in a different lane.
Right.
But it was still very entrepreneurial.
Absolutely.
Yes. And just like in any service-based business, you offer, if you're trying to start out, get some clients.
Right.
I'll give you some services for free for a month, whatever it may be.
Right.
I'm going to get these XYZ results.
Right.
And I know that through those results, you're going to want me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I kind of use that as leverage, but then to renegotiate, now it's going to be $1,000 for me to show up.
I'm sure some of those scenes were not really pleasant. You tried to get something. You tried to knock on the door.
I got told no, but I didn't care.
You got rejected, right?
I didn't care. And that's where I go back in my head, and comparison might be the thief of joy a little bit, right? I think, but in that moment, I go back and, you compare yourself to those moments, man.
Right.
You compare yourself to that passion. I think that energy of feeling people like that, crowd-wise, it's difficult to replicate in outside of that feeling again.
Absolutely.
It's different. And so it took me a little bit of time to get acclimated to that different feeling, or finding that same passion just in a different vertical maybe,
Right. There are few people who like to hear this answer no. And it really turns them on, right? When they hear the answer no, they find a way to convert it into a yes.
Well, energy cannot be created nor destroyed, right? It can only be repurposed,
exactly.
Right? And so it's absolutely, I think back then I subconsciously, I didn't know how to articulate that feeling.
Right.
But that's what the feeling was though. I didn't know how to articulate that feeling, but that's absolutely what it was.
But are you able to see that scenario when you look at it from today, or back then you knew that no kind of encourages you? Were you
to me, there was just no other fucking option.
Wow.
And that's always how it's been.
That's incredible.
There was no other, it was no. I heard no and it was so when's the yes? You know what I mean? There was no there was no no's. I didn't care.
At some point, I know that because that's the reason why we kind of met. You stopped that whole DJing career,
Yeah.
right? You finished that whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And again, you're telling me right now that it was incredibly difficult for you to even open the door for that, right?
Oh.
How would you be able to dump something that easily that you worked so hard?
And it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. But I have this analogy, right? So bear with me, okay? So you think of the universe, all right? Or God, whatever you want to call it out there, right? I call it the universe though, right? So you think of the universe and you split the line in half, right? And on the right side, you have all these uncomfortable decisions.
Right.
Okay. And so if the universe knows, and you should have the humility to be honest enough with yourself to do the same and be honest with yourself, okay? And the universe knows it, whether you want to admit it or not, right? But you should be able to admit it to yourself. On the right-hand side, you have decisions that you need to give up, but are really uncomfortable for you. So
Right.
if you have, and let's say for you, going out with your friends, you know what's holding you back, but it's a pretty easy decision for you to give up.
Right.
You're going to receive a blessing as equal on the opposite of the other side, right? So let's say you have on the left-hand side all the blessings once you give up these things, right?
Right.
And so something on this side right here
Right.
that is kind of easy for you to give up. And then if you give it up though, you're going to get, because life is very sacrificial, right? So you're going to,
Are you able to see that like a formulation? Like the moment you give up on something, you kind of see the reward.
then that's where the skill has become, right? So
Wow.
I know that, okay, I know for me, because I'm always very honest with myself, to a very brutally honest, right? So I know that if this is minor uncomfortable for me to give up, I'm going to receive a minor blessing on the other side. Not minor, but I'm going to receive something equal and opposite on the other side. For me, giving up that career and things like that, and it's still inside of me. If you
Right.
cut me open,
Sure.
I bleed performance.
You're an artist.
It's
You're an
through and
artist.
through,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think so much of entrepreneurship is creativity. And that's why a lot of people fail, is because they forget this idea of you still have to believe in something before it exists.
Absolutely.
Think about how creative you have to be to go say, I'm going to go somehow monetize the idea of managing people's rental properties for them. That's creativity.
Absolutely.
But a lot of people think once you get older, I can't be creative, whatever it may be, right? But to finish my analogy here is, then if you have something way uncomfortable on the other side, you're going to receive a blessing equal and opposite on the other side.
Wow.
Right. And so I've always known from that moment forward, I knew that like life is very sacrificial. And the more you give, the more you're going to receive.
Absolutely.
And
So
so
the waiting time changes for a person by person.
Yes.
And we may not be as patient, right? Like
yeah. Or,
sometimes
but I
we're
think that's where people mess up a little bit. Right.
Right.
But and so, I think, excuse me, back onto your, your question. Yeah. It was a tough thing to give up. It was something that was on my mind for a little bit, and I think.
and when did that happen exactly? Like, when did you say, like, no more DJing?
So I was living in Arizona for a while, years, right? And I flunked out of college.
Right.
But that was due to me knowing, for one, school's never going to be my way out.
Right.
Two, though, it was all music. Once
sure.
I found music, I was like, none of this other stuff mattered. I looked at my bank account. I said, I don't need any of that.
Right.
I said, I'm good, right?
Right.
And so I was, I like flunked out, never showed up to class, whatever. And so
Right.
I left Arizona, and I found myself in some, I was definitely addicted to some substances that I was not proud
Good,
of,
okay.
and so
Yeah.
and so
But what was your reasoning when you were literally introduced to those kind of things? You're
Well,
like,
because
I'm an artist, I'm a creative thing.
it
it's gonna
was
help me
truly,
out.
it was, you got off stage. That was the highest you'll ever feel in your life, right? Of getting off in front of thousands of people chanting your name, asking for a photo. You get off stage now.
Right.
And you're alone with your thoughts. You're driving back home when your driver's driving you back, and you're alone or something, just you
Right.
and your manager, and you're like, what do I do now?
Right.
Like, there's no way. It's the gnarliest come down I've ever had in my
Right.
life. And I've been sober now for 2 years or so, right? And a little bit more.
Maybe like your soul knew that it was not in the right environment, and that substance was kind of like a calming down, like kind of like stopping that whole noise. Like you knew that already.
I think you're very well. I think that's very well said. My soul knew it, right? I think I firmly believe the universe is so beautiful and abundant that it will never steer you in the wrong direction, right? And so I know that I had to go through those feelings in some way, shape, or form,
Right.
to be able to be here now, where I very am, and that's why through meditation and other things, I've just learned to be just delusionally
Right.
grateful for the present moment,
Right.
and so I put those things aside, and it was a tough decision, but I came back and was on the journey of kind of finding sobriety, but I didn't really know I needed to find sobriety at that point yet, you know?
Uh-huh.
Because I still came home and was smoking and drinking a good amount, you know,
Sure.
and doing other stupid
You
things.
reduce the amount of
Yeah, but I quit the
variety.
the Xanax cold turkey, right? And that's even a lot for me to come on here and say it kind of thing. But
Right.
I quit. You know, I know people at home will find. I think that vulnerability
sure.
speaks levels, right? And so I think, and that there, if I couldn't accept that and forgive myself then, like we talked about the other day, if I couldn't forgive myself then, I wouldn't be here now, right?
Right,
One day I just
exactly.
forgave myself.
No,
you know,
your story makes a lot of sense to me because the algorithm is the same, right?
Sure,
So
that's
there
a
is
great
a
way to put it.
challenge. There is a challenge. There is a
The
divorce.
hero's journey, a little bit, right?
Exactly. So it's basically like there is, you know, based on your time or your handling skills, right? Let's say divorce, parents, right? At the age of 12, you kind of analyze what the situation is. You take your side and you handle it. Next one is like you become kind of famous, right? It's a lot of issue to deal with, right? At that age. So you kind of like figure out what to do with that. And finally, the you know the substances and drugs is the other thing, right? You're taken away by it, and then at some point you're like, hey, you know, I gotta stop. So I think the situations are very different, but your method of dealing with them is the same.
That's a great point. I think you're correct. You know, I've always been the guy that had to touch the fire once, though, to know
Right.
it was
Right.
hot. But I do take pride, like I said a little bit ago, that on some level, once I touched it once, I kind of knew. You know, and even when I was in those rough days, you know, I knew what I was doing was wrong. Like I was never this like, oh, just like ignorance is bliss, whatever. Like I knew what I was doing
Right.
was not the right thing.
But we justify.
Yeah, and
That's like how our minds work, right?
yeah.
Like justification.
And I
like
think
that's there.
I knew, and this is gonna sound kind of probably fucked up a little bit. I knew I had to be so sick and tired to make me want to change. Like I had to be so sick and tired of being sick and tired, where I almost was like
Yeah.
in this middle line.
Yeah.
And I was like, I just got to go so far to this side to be like, I'm over this.
That's a strategy for some people.
And I knew that's what,
Yeah.
and I did it, and I knew I would stop eventually. As weird as that might sound, I knew there was this end point for me. I knew I was going to figure it out. Like
Right.
I just knew it some way, you
Right.
know, and whether it was through music or whatever, and I knew I was going to figure it out. And yeah, and so I transitioned out of that. It was, you know, the COVID comes, right? And
Right. That's my last question actually for this part,
Sure.
right? So if COVID had never happened, would you have still quit DJing, music, and
Probably
all that?
not.
Not right.
Probably not. I got to be honest with you, probably not.
Were you like a paralyzed in the very beginning, like when COVID hit the world?
Well,
you're
yeah,
like,
because
what am I going to do? And
the
all
brand
that, right?
was founded upon playing live shows. The producing kind of, I was a producer and I consider myself, you know, above, you know, pretty good, but the justification of everything came from the live shows.
Maybe you see what's happening as a message from the universe.
Oh,
type of
exactly.
thing. You're
That's
like, hey, this is for me, or this is my part to learn,
Yes,
right? For COVID, right?
Exactly.
That also helped me a lot. Like literally,
COVID, you're saying?
COVID, yeah, exactly.
How do you mean?
Well, back then I was still dealing with my company, right? And I had some toxic partnerships in my business. I had like some partners who had different priorities,
Sure.
right? I was trying to invest in the business, but my partners were like all about,
Pull
hey,
out,
let's
pull out,
milk
yeah.
milk the business, right? And yeah, in the beginning, it sounded like a shock for all of us, the COVID, because overnight we lost over 200 tenants, like literally. And I never forget about that.
Explain that really quick. How does that?
So the international students, they have to go back home. And the
got it.
president of the United States back then, it was Trump, right?
Got
Again, he's the president. So he literally made that announcement. He said, we're blocking the borders, no more entries. And before then, everybody had to leave, right?
Got it.
So that was kind of like the situation. So, and I remember losing over 300 tenants one night. But I don't know how I handled it.
You look back and you almost forget kind of thing?
Well, you know, I kind of trust the process too, but you got to wait until the end. That's the whole thing. In the very beginning, if you react, the process is not going to do that favor for you.
Sure, sure.
So somehow I was able to, like, I was managing to be patient with that and all that. But at the end, I'm able to say it's almost like a chemotherapy for a cancer patient. The COVID was like a chemotherapy for my business. I was able to get rid of all my
baggage, all the skeletons in the closet.
Absolutely,
kind of thing, yeah.
absolutely. And it was like more like a one-man show for me because my business got so big before COVID. I had to deal with so many like different partners, investors, and all that. And the moment COVID hit, literally everybody started like running away, and I was the only guy. which gave me a lot of like a little bit of like mystery. I'm like, hey, this is happening for a reason. Just
Yeah.
wait until the end.
Yeah.
And it worked out that way. So it really worked out that way. And that chemotherapy helped with the cancer.
Sure.
And the funny thing is, the cancer didn't really start with COVID. It was already cancer before. COVID helped with it.
It brought it to light. It shed the light
Absolutely.
on the
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, in your life, you got a challenging scar, right?
Sure.
And you never want to touch it because it's a scar. You don't want to let it bleed, right? And then another situation take place, and you literally like let those situations crash and get rid of both.
Yeah.
Like,
No,
that
it's
was
great.
my thing,
No,
like,
absolutely. And I think you bring up a really good point too about, looking at the scar and that analogy.
Yeah.
I think there's this reality too, though, of this idea of, I think there's this idea of knowing that you look at the boogeyman and the boogeyman stop being scary. I think when you
Right.
start running from those things, it
Right.
becomes a little bit scarier.
Right.
Where I think when you look at those things square in the face, you say, thank you for being here.
Right.
Let me extract the positive meaning from it
Right.
in one way, shape, or form. Because I think a lot of people forget, when you go negative, you don't extract. You can't.
Absolutely.
If you don't stay. If you go to a negative state, you can't extract a positive meaning from it.
Absolutely.
You have. That's what goes back to my analogy too. Is you have to be delusionally positive and delusionally
Right.
grateful.
Right.
When you have those, and that's why you have to believe that the universe always has your back.
Right.
No matter what it's putting you through, it always has your back. I think a
Absolutely.
lot of people think growth is easy. Oh, you just wake up one day. No, it's a lot of the universe slapping you in the face until
Right.
you get it.
Right.
Until
Absolutely.
until it makes sense for you.
Absolutely.
And so it's being able to stay in the positive state and extract the positive meaning from maybe what you might perceive
Right.
as a negative situation. But
Right.
if you go negative, you'll never be able to pull out the positive,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And
It's
which takes some you got to be a little nuts. But people might
Right.
today call it a little bit nuts to be able to do that.
Right.
But it's powerful.
Well, there is that theory. It's called lobster theory. Like in the bottom of the ocean, the lobsters fight for two things. Number one, food. Number two, shelter. But once they start fighting for those elements, it's usually there is no like a physical type of like interaction between them. So apparently, when they encounter each other to fight for the food or the shelter, there is this chemical production they make. So two lobsters, they're against each other, right? And the one that produces that like a fear chemical needs to pull back. And the other one is the winner.
Really?
Yeah, that lobster takes the shelter and the food. Guess what? It becomes an habit. So every
Interesting.
time there is another encounter now, the lobster is bigger because he takes the food and the shelter. The other encounter is a lot easier than the first one.
Interesting.
And this is how you become a big lobster.
yeah, that's how
Because you're used to, or the
yeah.
small one, right? Because there is something about that confidence element, right? You can't really gain it like artificially. You have to have it. I mean, of course, you can watch other people's Instagram stories and see how they become, confident and all that.
But you're right.
Absolutely, yeah,
The only way you learn how to fight is by fighting.
Absolutely.
Right. That's the only
Absolutely.
way. Right. And you go through, and I think you bring up. I think as we talk about a little bit off camera, right. Another interesting aspect too is the idea of we were talking about some homes in different areas.
Right.
We think that'd be a good segue
Right.
into there, right?
Right.
I think with your son you mentioned, but the interesting thing though is that I think something that I dealt with even growing up was this idea of looking around, right, and comparing and not having this or not having that, or seeing with the kids that grew up with money, whatever it may
Absolutely.
be, right? And I think it's this interesting idea though of knowing that on some level, it's all those things led up to exactly where
Right.
you are now,
Right.
right? And I think being able to look at those moments with gratitude and know that, like we said, it's you're not going to be able to experience. Those people never get to experience. Those old money people never get to experience
Right.
being that first person to do
Right,
those things,
right,
et cetera,
right,
And I
right,
think that goes a long way.
Right.